And thanks to At Home for joining us this hour. So there's a town in California called Yucca Valley. It's a beautiful place. It's located in the Mojave Desert. And the good people of Yucca Valley have this man representing them in Congress. His name is Jay Obernolte. He is a Republican. He was first elected to Congress just a couple of terms ago in 2020. And Obernolte had a pretty easy re-election this year. His constituents sent their Republican congressman back to Washington by a big margin, by more than 20 points. But although he had an easy ride in his district, overall, this isn't a bright red county in California. Yucca Valley's in San Bernardino County. Biden won there in 2020 by 10 points. This past election, Trump just very narrowly won San Bernardino County just by a couple of points. So it's an interesting place. And over the weekend, Congressman Obernolte held a town hall in his home district in that sort of purple, interesting part of California, in Yucca. And this is how it went, pretty much right from the jump.
My question to you as a member of Congress, which holds the purse.
That's right.
And what are you going to do to stop the cuts how do you feel about a unelected, non-confirmed balances of our nation?
Great question, and I'm glad you asked it.
Oh, the big oh at the end there. They almost know what he's gearing up to do, right? Remember, purple district, barely went for Trump. But here's how Congressman Obernolte answered that question.
Great question, and I'm glad you asked it.
Answer it!
And I am very glad that someone is looking at all of the waste.
It's not up to Musk. You're surrendering to billionaires, you coward!
I'll tell you this. The American people voted for change in November.
He's almost proud of it, right? I'll tell you this, the American people voted for change in November, and change is what they're getting. And then he gets shouted down by a couple hundred people booing him to his face. His constituents. If you're a Republican member of Congress continuing to carry water for this administration, continuing to defend what Donald Trump and his top campaign donor are doing to the United States government, this is perhaps not an unfamiliar vibe these days. I mean, we're seeing this at town halls all over the country. We're also seeing, huge protests like these ones all over the country this weekend. There were protests all over the country this weekend marking the 3rd anniversary of Russia invading Ukraine. People out there in the streets demonstrating their support for Ukraine, their opposition to Russia and its dictator, Vladimir Putin, even as the Trump administration switches sides in that war and now appears to be supporting Russia. There were also more protests over the weekend at Tesla dealerships in places like Seattle and Fort Lauderdale, Florida, and New York and San Francisco. There was also a very dramatic protest in Yosemite National Park this weekend. Federal workers sending up a classic sign of distress. American flag upside down at the top of El Capitan, a way of letting the country know that things are not okay. We're going to be talking later on in the show about this big dramatic show of force we are seeing all over the country. And about this real, I think, shock to the system for Republicans who are daring to speak to their own constituents. But to be clear, Democratic members of Congress aren't necessarily finding it easy either. They are getting pushed really hard at their own town halls as well, at their own congressional offices. Right? Not because they're siding with Trump and his top campaign donor like Republicans are. No Democrats are doing that. Democrats are getting pushed because even though they're in opposition to what Trump and Musk are doing, many Democratic members of Congress around the country are finding out loud that their constituents think they're not doing enough. Yeah, being in opposition is one thing, but you're not doing enough to fight back. This was over the weekend, a town hall in Cincinnati held by Democratic Congressman Greg Landsman. Here was the local press coverage. At a Cincinnati town hall, a Democratic congressman is urged to be more confrontational. Another 300 or so people showed up in Hawaii on Saturday to put pressure on their Democratic Congresswoman, Jill Takuda. One constituent of the Congresswoman telling her, quote, "Have a backbone, please, please." This was just last week, dramatic footage that ricocheted around the country from a town hall held by Democratic Congressman Paul Tonko.
I saw you on TV at NOAA. I saw you on TV at the Department of Education. What I'm saying is this. Somebody asked you what your red line was, and you said that the time is always right to go. Does that mean the red line has already been crossed? Because I think it has. If you ask us to show up, Congressman Tonko, we will show up. But it's been not. We have to take the gloves off. We can't live for protocol. They're not playing by the rules. We have to take it through them. When I saw you in those places, I saw you next to Maxine Waters. Again, I was so proud that my representative was on the front line, right there. But I thought about Jimmy Carter, and I thought about John Lewis. And I know what John Lewis would have done. He would have gotten arrested that day. Make them outlaw you. We will stand behind you. We will be there with you. I will get arrested with you.
We have to take the gloves off. Americans pushing Republicans really hard, particularly when they try to defend Trump, but Americans also really pushing their Democratic members of Congress to do more, to fight harder against this White House and what feels like a real crisis in Washington. And that's happening not just to Democratic members of Congress you're learning about for the first time here, because I'm showing you tape from their town hall. It's happening to all the Democrats, including the Democratic leader in Washington, Hakeem Jeffries, leader of the House. This was outside his office in Brooklyn, New York on Thursday. Hundreds of people calling on him to be more aggressive toward this White House, to stand up faster, to stand up more firmly, to fight harder against Trump and his top campaign donor. It happened to Leader Jeffries again the very next day in Oakland, California. This was outside an event where Congressman Jeffries was giving remarks. Hundreds of people gathered outside demanding that he do more. And I absolutely understand the sentiment, but what can he do? What does he believe is within his power? Joining us now is the man himself, Democratic leader in the House, Hakeem Jeffries. Leader Jeffries, it's a real honor to have you here tonight. Thank you so much for joining us.
Good evening. Great to be with you.
So every day now, I feel like we're getting more and more tape and dramatic reportage from congressional town halls all around the country, seeing Republican members of Congress pressed by their own constituents, even by their own Republican constituents, about what Trump and Musk are doing that the public doesn't like. But we also see voters imploring Democrats, and you specifically, to fight harder, to not be nice, to break protocol, to get arrested if that's what it takes. How are you hearing those calls? What can you tell voters tonight who say you could be doing more than you're doing?
Well, I think we understand the passionate outcry that we are seeing all across the country as it relates to the flood of extremism that's being unleashed on the American people by this administration, by this president, by his allies like Elon Musk. And of course, it's creating chaos and confusion and crisis, and there's corruption that's connected to it as well. And so we're going to continue to operate in an all-hands-on-deck way. That's what we've said from the beginning. It means that we've got to push back aggressively in the Congress, as we're doing, and certainly we'll have a budget fight that will be on the floor as early as tomorrow, where every single Democrat, I believe, is going to stand in firm opposition to this GOP tax scam, which is all about rewarding their billionaire donors and wealthy corporations and undermining working class Americans by sticking it to them and cutting Medicaid and things that are important to their health, their safety, and their economic well-being. It's all hands on deck in the Congress, it's all hands on deck in the courts, and it's certainly all hands on deck in communities across the country. And you are seeing that kind of mobilization take place as you've illustrated.
And I got to say, the mobilization is a bottom-up, very, very grassroots, very organic, coast-to-coast uprising. And what they are pushing against is what's happening in Washington, but what they are trying to push up and push forward is you and your colleagues, to try to further empower you and further inspire you by one way or another to find new tactics, to find new avenues, to find new leverage. I mean, let's take this budget thing. You're going to expect this vote potentially as early tomorrow in the House. The Republicans' margin in the House is razor thin. We know at least one Republican is planning on voting no on that budget. You say you think you'll have every Democrat voting no. You've also asked members of the Democratic caucus to meet tomorrow on the Capitol steps to try to make clear to the American people. Members of the House Democratic caucus should join us on the East Capitol steps at 12 noon tomorrow to make clear to the American people the stakes of what's happening. What are you planning for that event? What should the American public expect around this budget fight, and how consequential it'll be?
Well, one of the things that's important is we have to tell the story of the everyday Americans who are at risk of dealing with the pain and the suffering that these extreme MAGA Republican proposals and cuts will unleash on them and the American people. If you just take, for instance, the proposal to cut as much as $1 trillion from Medicaid, if not more, in connection with the Republican budget resolution proposal, that's going to hurt children, hurt everyday Americans with disabilities. It's going to hurt seniors. It's going to close hospitals, including in rural America. It's going to shut down nursing homes. It's going to hurt veterans and others who rely on Medicaid benefits. And so we've got to be able to tell that story, of course with urgency, of course on the floor of the House, certainly in committees, but we also have to take the case directly to the American people. And tomorrow at 12, that's exactly what we're going to do. Having stories told through the voices of those Americans impacted the most. Listen, I represent neighborhoods in central Brooklyn and beyond. I'm in those neighborhoods. I was there over the last few days, of course, and in other parts of the country. And so I understand that there's a lot of anxiety that has been caused. The communities that I represent in many ways have been dealing with trauma and anxiety for a long period of time. And this is a moment where that anxiety, of course, has been heightened across America. And so we're going to continue to rise to the occasion to meet the moment. The next 3 weeks will be critically important because we have the budget fight this week, and then, of course, Donald Trump will be on the Hill next week. And then after that, we'll have to figure out where we're going to land in advance of the March 14th funding deadline. 3 critical weeks to push back against the extremism and also to define ourselves as a party that actually wants to make life better for everyday Americans, drive down the high cost of living, solve problems for those hardworking American families who want us to give them a real shot at the American dream.
The case that you are making against Republican policies here is one that I hear and is cogent and that plays to a greater or lesser extent, I think, all across this country. The other thing that Americans are stressed out about, though, right now, is that policy doesn't feel like it's the main conversation right now. It feels like we are in the middle of a ketamine-fueled, middle-of-the-night, autocratic power grab that is rendering Congress irrelevant, that's rendering policy irrelevant, and that's rendering the rule of law an afterthought, if not a joke, to those who are planning on staying in power indefinitely without benefit of further elections. I mean, it is not about, it is about a bad budget. That's one of the things you have to contend with. But the fight here feels like it's on a different scale than the kinds of legislative counterpoint stuff that I think Democrats and Republicans are used to fighting over. And I think what Americans are sort of clamoring for is to hear from you personally, as the senior Democrat in Washington, in the House where the margins are so narrow, to hear from you that you understand the scale of the threat and you have ideas about how to interrupt what feels like something that we have not experienced since the Civil War in terms of the threat to our republic.
Well, it's certainly the case that we understand the scale of the threat. That can't be doubted. The CBC, which I'm a part of, definitively understands the scale of the threat. Our communities have been under siege, as you pointed out, since before the Civil War. I'm a direct descendant of those very communities, so we understand the struggle, the history, the strength of people like John Lewis, which we're going to channel. That's my experience. That's my personal experience. That's my family's experience. And so we understand that. And as a caucus, it's definitively the case that we understand that. Listen, we launched the Rapid Response Task Force and Litigation Working Group. It's going to be led by Joe Neguse and, of course, a brilliant constitutional lawyer, Jamie Raskin, to be able to respond to and work with our allies like Tish James and others in part of what we are responding to. Listen, Elon Musk and Donald Trump, they're flooding the zone in part to create distress, to create a sense of invincibility and inevitability. But the reality is, there have been more than 75 different lawsuits that have been filed by democracy reform groups, civil rights reform groups, by attorney generals like Tish James and others. And we're winning in court. They're losing. More than 35 different unconstitutional and unlawful executive orders and administrative actions have been challenged. And they're not winning those cases in terms of the Trump administration. They're losing over and over and over again. That's been a forceful pushback. And that, of course, will continue. The congressional battles will continue. And the mobilization in the communities will continue.
Does it help? Does it advance Democrats' ability to stand up against Trump and Musk and what's happening in Washington, to have people at these town halls, to have people protesting in various symbolic and important places, either that represent the government or that represent some of the forces that are at work right now within our government? Does people showing up and doing direct action, peaceful, nonviolent direct action, to try to put steel in your spine, among others, does it help, or is it more of a hindrance to you?
Well, listen, public sentiment is everything, as Abraham Lincoln once said. With it, nothing can fail. Without it, nothing can succeed. I don't think anyone needs additional steel put in their spine. Let's be clear about that. And I think, the House Democrats under the leadership of Nancy Pelosi during the prior Trump administration, continuing to where we are at this moment, are going to continue to push back forcefully, using every tool available. Now, I think it does help, for instance, that our House Republican colleagues are held accountable. Rachel, you appropriately mentioned we've got the narrowest majority that any party has had in the Congress since before the Great Depression. Narrowest majority. 218 Republicans, 215 Democrats. The Democrats are holding together. We're holding together, for instance, on this reckless Republican budget, which is a betrayal of working class Americans, and cuts to Medicaid, cuts to SNAP, cuts to veterans benefits. That's not theoretical. That hurts real people that I represent and that every single member of the House Democratic Caucus represents. That's not a theoretical fight. That's a real fight. But here's the thing. On any given issue like the budget, we only need 3. Not all 218 Republicans. We only need 3 to do the right thing for their constituents. And so the activity that we've seen over the last few days, over the last week or so, I think is going to let the Republicans know that no one is going to remove the spotlight from them. They shouldn't be able to escape accountability, and as Democrats, we're going to make sure that they don't.
Democratic leader in the House, Hakeem Jeffries. Leader Jeffries, it is a real honor to have you here. I know that your time is valuable. Come back anytime, sir. I'd love to talk to you anytime you can stand it. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
All right. I'm going to take a little point of personal privilege here just for a moment, if it is okay with you. You may have already heard about changes that have been announced at MSNBC over the last couple of days. The new president of our network made it official today. Some of our shows are moving to different time slots or expanding or going away altogether. In prime time, just so you know, I am here 5 days a week for the first 100 days of Trump's presidency as planned. And as planned, I will go back to just Mondays after that. That is not changing. What is changing is that the show, Alex Wagner Tonight, is not coming back at 9 after the first 100 days. Instead, Alex will be a senior political analyst for MSNBC, and Jen Psaki will start hosting the 9 p.m. hour all the other nights except for Mondays. So that's a big change. An even bigger programming change is at 7 p.m. Eastern, where Joy Reid's show, The Readout, ended tonight. And Joy is not taking a different job in the network. She is leaving the network altogether. And that is very, very, very hard to take. I am 51 years old. I have been gainfully employed since I was 12. And I have had so many different kinds of jobs, you wouldn't believe me if I told you. But in all of the jobs I have had, in all of the years I have been alive, there is no colleague for whom I have had more affection and more respect than Joy Reid. I love everything about her. I have learned so much from her. I have so much more to learn from her. I do not want to lose her as a colleague here at MSNBC. And personally, I think it is a bad mistake to let her walk out the door. It is not my call, and I understand that, but that's what I think. I will tell you, it is also unnerving to see that on a network where we've got two, count them, two non-white hosts in primetime, both of our non-white hosts in primetime are losing their shows, as is Katie Fang on the weekend. And that feels worse than bad, no matter who replaces them. That feels indefensible, and I do not defend it. But there's just one other piece of it that you should know. From your side of the TV screen, you will mostly see changes in terms of who's in the anchor chair. And actually, everybody who's going to be in anchor chairs from here on out are great colleagues and great at what they do. And you are not going to be disappointed in who's on our air and what you're going to be seeing. But one thing you cannot necessarily see is that the people who get our shows on the air, they're really being put through the ringer. Dozens of producers and staffers, including some who are among the most experienced and most talented and most specialist producers in the building, are facing being laid off. They're being invited to reapply for new jobs. That has never happened at this scale in this way before when it comes to programming changes, presumably because it's not the right way to treat people, and it's inefficient and it's unnecessary, and it kind of drops the bottom out of whether or not people feel like this is a good place to work, and so we don't generally do things that way. Maybe all of our folks, including most of the people who are getting this very show on the air right now, maybe they will all get new jobs here, and I hope they do, but in the meantime, being put in this kind of limbo, the anxiety and the discombobulation is off the charts at a time when this job already is extra stressful and difficult. It is not news for me to tell you that the press and freedom of the press are under attack in a way that is really, it's a big deal for our country. It's very visceral for us here. I know that the business of the press is not an easy thing, and I know that no job is forever. But I think I'm safe in saying for all of us anchors who you know through the TV, please know that what pains us the most is not what happens to us. It is what happens to our coworkers on whom we depend and who you don't necessarily know, but we respect and love them and depend on them. And did I mention we respect them? This is a difficult time in the news business, but it does not need to be this difficult. We welcome new voices to this place and some familiar voices to new hours. It's going to be great, honestly, and we want to grow and succeed and reach more people than ever and be resilient and stay here forever. I also believe, and I bet you believe, that the way to get there is by treating people well. Finding good people, good colleagues, doing good work with them, and then having their back. That we could do a lot better on, a lot better. I'll be right back. People gathered in Washington, D.C. this weekend on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial to show support for our allies in Ukraine. Today marks 3 years since Russia invaded its neighbor. People marched in Grand Rapids, Michigan, carrying Ukrainian flags. Stop Putin, stop war. There was a pro-Ukraine rally at the state capitol in Madison, Wisconsin. There was another at the state capitol in Salt Lake City, Utah, also at the state capitol in Columbus, Ohio. People rallied in support of our allies in Ukraine in Detroit, Michigan, and in Boston, Massachusetts. There was a huge turnout in Houston, Texas, in Reno, Nevada. And all around the world, from Toronto to Warsaw, from Paris to Melbourne, Australia. All these people all across our country, all across the world, all standing in solidarity with the people of Ukraine as they mark 3 years of trying to stay a country, of trying to resist this unprovoked Russian invasion. But here's how the U.S. government under Donald Trump marked that milestone today. This was the banner headline today at the Washington Post this afternoon. Quote, U.S. sides with Russia against Ukraine war resolution. Quote, Washington breaks with Europe, refusing to condemn Moscow on third anniversary of invasion. And, you know, UN resolutions are non-binding. Votes like this are symbolic. But this is essentially the U.S. declaring pretty much formally that we're on Russia's side now. U.S. was one of only 18 countries in the world to vote against Ukraine and with Russia on this today. So who are we? Who are our allies now? Who are we allied with now? Well, based on this vote, we now stand with Russia, obviously. Also North Korea, Iran, Belarus, Burkina Faso, Burundi, Central African Republic, Equatorial Guinea, Eritrea, Haiti, Hungary, Israel, Mali, the Marshall Islands, Nicaragua, Niger, Sudan, and the United States of America. What a club to be part of. Welcome to our new axis. And how are we doing with the countries that have long been our allies? You know, the European nations that have been our closest allies for the last 80 years or so. Well, there was a remarkable moment, kind of an embarrassing moment in the Oval Office today, one in which I thought President Trump might burst. He's sitting there next to President Emmanuel Macron of France. And Trump tried to claim right there in front of Macron that somehow Europe is going to be getting back all the money that it's invested in Ukraine to support its defense against Russia. The U.S. is somehow getting screwed. We gave them the money, but Europe, it was just loans and they're getting all the money back. The French president then interrupts the president of the United States to correct him, to say, actually, Europe has given more money than the United States to Ukraine's war effort and isn't getting any more of it back than the U.S. is. Watch this and watch how President Macron touches Trump's arm here. Watch Trump's reaction.
Europe is loaning the money to Ukraine. They get their money back.
No, in fact, to be frank, we paid 60% of the total efforts, and it was through, like the US, loans, guarantee, grants, and we provided real money. To be clear.
No, in fact, to be frank, I can't even do a fake French accent. To be frank. But you see the way he puts his hand on Trump's arm? Like the way you do when Grandpa starts going on again about something he saw on Fox News? Now, Grandpa, we talked about this. You keep saying Europe is getting all its money back from Ukraine. But Grandpa, to be frank, that's just not true.
In a quaint village, Jamie, a young baker living in a mushroom-shaped house, is beloved for his delicious, mushroom-shaped cakes. Lucas, a skilled handyman known for helping the townspeople, frequently visits Jamie for treats and to lend a hand. When Jamie's baking supplies are delayed due to a supplier going out of business, he becomes distraught. Lucas comforts him, and in that moment, they realize their growing feelings for each other. As Lucas helps Jamie find a new supplier and supports him through his struggles, their bond deepens into love. Soon, the village comes to see them as a perfect pair, celebrating their sweet connection. To get your copy of The Baker and the Handyman's Sweet Connection, please visit lulubooks.com. This is an electronic book, so be sure to have an EPUB or PDF reader to enjoy this heartwarming story by Ariel Williams.
To view more ebooks, click Linktree in bio.
Terms and Conditions of a King follows King, a young Arab-American man whose journey of self-discovery leads him through heartbreak, longing, and growth. After ending a promising but unsustainable relationship with Thomas, a man of status and high expectations, King finds himself grappling with loneliness and yearning for connection. His encounter with Malcolm, a charming but emotionally unavailable man, reveals the pitfalls of settling for less than what he deserves. Through it all, King's dreams, his growing independence, and his candid conversations with his confidant, Princess Ariel, guide him toward a powerful realization: self-worth cannot be compromised. Set against the backdrop of everyday struggles, budding careers, and the complexities of modern love, Terms and Conditions of a King is a story of resilience, introspection, and the courage to let go of what doesn't serve you. Ariel Williams weaves a tender and transformative narrative about learning to value oneself, even in moments of uncertainty, and believing in a future where true love and fulfillment are possible. For more, click tree link in profile.